Hey, everybody. My name is David Michael.
And I am Michael Carter.
And we are
Ridiculously Bored.
All right, Michael, we are in different states again.
Yes.
Which I'm guessing is going to make this flow a lot smoother because it felt a little awkward just talking to each other like 3 feet away from each other's face. And I don't know why, because we did it for 20 years. But for some reason, after doing this show for 30 some odd episodes, when we got in the same room, it was a little bit weird.
Yeah, well, that's because I didn't realize you do this without pants on.
Sorry, I forgot to tell you that. Doesn't everybody do that in Zoom meetings and shit?
So I am trying out, once I was out there with you, we talked about you had to set up for your microphone. So I have a new microphone. Well, I have the same microphone, a new display for it. So I'm interested.
Can we talk about your unoriginalness and how every time you come out here, you always take something away and repeat it at your house?
Well, the one thing I won't take away is the fact that you wear a lot of Lululemon, as I found out last week.
Hey, for the record, their menswear is fantastic. My wife had a summer job there. She was bored one summer and decided to work at Lululemon and got like a ridiculous discount. It was like 50% off everything. And their clothing is super high quality, but super expensive.
For women.
For men, actually, if you've ever been to a Lululemon, half the store is men. And it's athletic wear, and I'm an athlete. You wouldn't really understand because you don't do anything athletic. So I get it. It's okay.
Yeah, I squeeze this body into some of that tight spandex. It's a threat to everybody around me.
People are hiding their children's eyes.
Throwing a fucking hand grenade in a room. So, I have a question for you.
All right, go ahead. Get it out. You were here for an entire fucking week. And I know damn well that you just made note of all the things that you thought were funny that we do here. So go ahead. Have at it. We'll give you the first half of the episode, and you can just make fun of us for, I don't know, whatever you want.
I'm not a fucking trained lion that you think you could tell me when to do things and whip the whip and throw a piece of meat in front of me. Though I'm not against throwing a piece of meat in front of me. But I'd rather than just sprinkle them in as they come around.
Got it. Okay.
So right. I have a question for you.
I have an answer for you. Right. Fuck off.
So I want to run by a scenario to you, and you tell me what you think. So let's say you're hanging off a cliff, and somebody comes to help you. And in essence, the only way they can help you is to get so close that they're pressing their dick against your back. But you're hanging off a cliff, and you need help. You accept that help, right?
Are they naked?
No, not naked, but you can definitely feel their dick against your back.
Okay. Did you feel my dick against your back last week? Because I totally thought you were sleeping.
So, yeah, it's nothing there to wake me up either, I'll be honest with you people.
Whatever.
All right, let's say you fall in a swamp filled with alligators.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to help you out of the swamp.
If his dick is long enough, I will grab it and pull myself out for sure.
Now.
I will take dick over death any day.
Okay. Now. Let's say you're in a gym and you're holding 10-pound weights over your head and the guy doesn't trust that you're going to be able to hold them for too long. And he comes so close to you that I could definitely tell he wasn't Jewish. That's the most I can tell you. But the fact of the matter is, like, I could feel, because he had me doing a certain amount of reps, and it's my personal trainer that I'm using now. I know by the looks of me, it hasn't been much success, but I am using him. He eventually, after me getting, 5, 10, 15 into it or whatever, he realized like he could see that the strength was going. So he got really, really close and he was right up on me. And I had to decide in that moment, is it worth potentially dropping a dumbbell on my head to move away from him, or should I just stay there? So I stayed.
And did you enjoy it?
I did not enjoy it, but it was a moment. Him and I had a moment now.
Well, for what it's worth, 1 pound dumbbells don't weigh a whole lot, so you could have dropped it and you would have been fine.
They weren't 1 pound. They weren't far from it, but they weren't 1 pound.
All right. Well, hey, you know what? Sometimes you got to take a little dick in order to make progress in life.
We know that. Wait, what? So how was your week since we've left?
Oh, Well, I've been sterilizing the house since you guys left. Other than, no, I'm kidding. You know what? Week was fine. Nothing crazy happened. Yeah, nothing at all. We did, after you guys left, we did go paddleboarding. We've talked about my paddleboards. We went paddleboarding on Sunday. We drove down to the lake at like 6 a.m. because it was just, obviously it gets super hot any later than that. And then we paddleboarded out into the middle of the lake, bungeed our boards together and had a cooler and just drank and laid out in the sun for like 2 hours. And it actually surprisingly made me not hate the state of Arizona for a couple hours. Because we were in the water, feet in the water, arms in the water, chilling. We've got a Bluetooth waterproof radio. So it was like being at the beach, not sweating and melting and enjoying some music and some beers. And it was actually like somewhat enjoyable. So much so that we're like, we need to do this more often so that we don't hate this place.
And then when 9 a.m. rolled around and it was 95 degrees already, did you still have that same feeling?
No, we left.
So at one point when we were out there, right, you took my kids paddleboarding. They both liked it a lot. So that was fun. One of the things, and I think it was at that point when we were going to the paddleboarding place where I think it was my son. It could have been my daughter, but I think it was my son. He asked you and I, which is harder, packing to go somewhere or packing to go home? And both you and I were like, well, clearly packing to go somewhere, because once you're there and you leave, you just pack everything up that you brought and you go home. So maybe it was Tuesday of this week. My wife couldn't find some things. And it turns out that she left a drawer full of shit at your house.
Yeah. I didn't know about that, but I did see some messages going back and forth between my wife and your wife. So that makes perfect sense now.
And I just thought it was really funny because we had actually had that conversation just before we left about how it's so much easier when you're going home. You just pack everything that you brought.
There is a caveat to that, though, because, every time my wife and I go somewhere, we usually fucking end up buying shit. And then, let's get something for my daughter. Let's get something for my son. Get something for the in-laws, whatever, right? And then you end up with so much shit that you have to, let's go buy a bag so that we can pack an additional bag and send it back on the plane. That quite happens a lot.
Yeah. Well, my wife has, because they're deals and she likes spending money, she buys these bags that zip down really small. So sometimes she'll pack one of those inside the other bag so she can open it up.
Right.
So we'll see.
All right. Well, before we digress too far, let's talk about this week's topic, because I've been actually looking forward to this conversation for a while.
Okay.
New Rochelle.
Yes.
New York.
So this came up recently because me and a bunch of my cousins got together for dinner. First time in a long time that I think it was 6 of us who got together. One of the reasons why it's been so long was obviously because of COVID. One doesn't live that close, so we had to really organize once things started opening up. And while we're at dinner, my youngest cousin, who he's also the one who sometimes he's like, oh, that was a 90s rap group? He always just seems to be behind on certain things. So we were talking about New Rochelle a little bit, and one of us mentioned how bad it was, and he was like, oh, it wasn't that bad. I don't know what you're talking about. And all the rest of us were like, what?
He clearly lived on the north side.
Yeah. Or just was sheltered because he was the baby of the bunch.
Yeah.
So we were like, no. New Rochelle had a lot of problems. And so I was like, you know what? And when you and I were talking, I was like, I'd like to tell some random stories about New Rochelle. Some we might have hit on little pieces here and there, but I thought it'd be a good idea to just run down some stories on New Rochelle.
Encapsulate them all in one episode?
Yes.
For sure, let's do it. Where did you want to start, though? Jesus Christ.
Well, we could start anywhere. I'm going to start with the easy one, though, and I've talked about this one before. My house, so we lived on the south end of New Rochelle, and New Rochelle was kind of split into really, even though there's an east, but it was really split into 3. There was the west end, which were a lot of the Italians and Hispanics. There was the north end, which were
West
$2
end,
million
you mean
homes.
like Union Avenue, that whole area
Union
down there?
Avenue,
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
There was North End, which had the $2 million homes. Iona College is near there. New Rochelle High School is near there. You're
also where Dick Van Dyke used to live. There's
like that kind of
statue of him in that house. Yeah.
And then the South End, which is near the water, which is near Hudson Park, Glen Island, those type of things. That's where we grew up.
Right.
And so, my house was robbed 4 times growing up, and the couple times we always seemed to be kids, I think, who were doing it, because they never really took a lot of stuff. They just took basically what they could grab, and I think it was because they knew we weren't home and things like that. So,
but was it like TVs and VCRs, or was it like jewelry? Like what type of stuff ended up missing?
Yes, and yes.
Well,
it was all different times though. So like one time they
you just said they didn't take much, but it sounds like they took everything.
Well, one time they took the TV and the VCR, right?
Right.
And it's funny because years later, my brother's house, he moved down to North Carolina. My brother's house got robbed. And he unfortunately didn't have the money to buy a couple things. So I bought it for him and my nephew. My nephew's like Xbox type thing got stolen. My brother's TV got stolen. So I gave him the money to buy the stuff. And I told him, I said, one of the things you got to explain to your kid is when we grew up and shit got stolen, like we didn't have it replaced for months. Like, mom and dad had to restart saving to be able to buy another TV. Like they couldn't just go buy it. Yeah. So, then the last time, which was the day of my sister's wedding. So clearly, when somebody gets married, there's always this big pomp and circumstances that go along with it. The limos are out front. Everybody's taking a million pictures. So while it was supposed to be like a happy day for the family, clearly people were just watching like, oh, yep, nobody's going to be home later there. We're robbing that place.
Right.
So that time they just took some cash that like a couple of the bridesmaids left and jewelry that people had left.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad's, so my dad was a licensed electrician growing up. So he always had, his entire business was in his van. He had this big van. And for most of my childhood, it was a very old and loud van. So loud that I was late for school almost every day just because we were always late. And the kids in the school could hear us coming. And they would make fun. They would say, "Oh, David's here," because they could hear. And this was a pretty large school with 7 or 8 floors worth of classrooms, and they could hear my dad's truck coming around the corner dropping me off. So that was kind of funny. But his entire business existed in that van. He had shelves on it, and all he had all sorts of wiring and nuts and bolts and all sorts of stuff. But more importantly, he had tools that were really expensive. A drill gun nowadays is, $80, $70, $80, but back then, it was like $200-$300 for a good quality one that's going to last, and he had all these different like right angle drills and sawzalls and all sorts of things so that he can do the things that he needed to do in order to get his job done. And he kept it all inside of his truck.
Right.
And every once in a while, I would wake up in the morning and I would hear slamming around the house, and I'd hear F-bombs. And my dad was always a big hothead, so and I'd wake up and I'd go outside, and he would be screaming because somebody broke into his truck. And then I'd look out the window to the parking lot and see my dad's truck, and all the doors were wide open. Like when they robbed his truck, they would literally just open all the doors, empty it, and then leave it. Like they wouldn't even try and cover up the fact that, hey, we stole this. They would just leave all the doors wide open. So like you knew as soon as you walked outside that you'd been robbed, because everything was just, and you can see like a trail of like nuts and bolts, because as they were running away, shit would like fall out and whatnot.
Like a robot that's dying as it runs away.
Yeah. So I never talked about that much, but that happened almost every year. So it wasn't just like 3 or 4 times. It was an annual thing. So much so that at the end of the day, my dad, after he like replaced them all, he would bring all of his tools inside the house so that the truck wasn't as valuable as it was prior to that. But I also remember I used to work with my dad in the summers, and I hated it, but he paid really well, so I could definitely use the money. So I would be his assistant, and sometimes we'd go to the Bronx, we'd go to the city, we'd go all over the place, right? One time we were in the Bronx, and we had to stop at this electrical supply store, and it was like the most major street there. There was probably 2 lanes on each side, like cars all over the place, people walking everywhere. It was not like a quiet street by any stretch of the imagination. We both, exit the van, lock it, go into the store, and we're there for 20 minutes. We come out of the store, and all the doors in the van are open, and it's emptied. Like they had, in a matter of 20 minutes and in broad daylight with people all around, had smashed the window, opened the door, opened all the doors, and emptied the entire truck of all of its contents, and then ran away by the time we had gotten out there. And we walked out and we're like, did anybody see this happen? And everybody
nobody
just
ever sees anything.
Yeah, nobody sees anything.
So that's the other thing is, we live from the center of Manhattan. We only live about 18, 19 miles. Mm-hmm. To the Bronx border, you can actually get there from the edge of New Rochelle. You could get there in like 6 miles, right? So we actually live really close. And sometimes when I talk to people and they're like, "Oh, I'm from New York," and I'm like, "Oh, where are you from?" And they're like, "Yeah, New York." And I'm like, "Well, where?" And they're like, "Rochester." I'm like,
"Yeah,
Rochester. You might as well be from Canada at that point." Like, if you're that far up. So, I've only had one car that stuff was robbed from the car, but it so stupid. I had this new Jeep. We got a brand new Jeep in 92. And so this happened a few years after that, but I got the new Jeep in 92. I put this, as everybody should, this fucking kick-in sound system in it. Mm-hmm. And smartly, I had an alarm on it as well. So there was a major flaw in these old Jeep designs was they didn't have a lock on the inside to open the trunk. I mean, the front, like you do on cars. Mm-hmm. You actually had these 2 clips on the outside of the Jeep. So somebody just took the clips off, lifted the hood, and disconnected the battery. So killed the alarm, so it never went off.
So, by the way, I owned a completely upscaled, tricked out Jeep, a Rubicon, and it was a 2012. Okay. Still, with the hood, it's held in by clips. So if you want to, you just unplug both clips, pop the hood open, and you can do whatever you want with underneath the hood. So that's still a design feature today. You can buy locking clips, but they still sell them like that, 20, 30 years later.
So I doubt anybody's robbing in Arizona. By the time you get out there, you're too hot and sweaty. So they did that, and they took all the speakers out of the car. So the whole sound system they took out.
Where was it? Was that in front of your house when they did that?
It was on Main Street, actually.
While you were at work?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so again, nobody sees anything when this kind of stuff happens. It's the old snitches get stitches, right? That approach goes through.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's like just like stuff that happened around us. Like there was like stuff that happened to us too. I mean, I can go on for hours about just all the different stories. Like, walking home from school, I went to a Catholic school that was, like a mile, maybe a mile and a half away from the house. And walking home, I got robbed probably 10, 15 times. Kids just walk up to you, they surround you. It's a 5-on-1 situation, and they're like, "Yeah, empty your pockets."
Especially in your little preppy outfit, they knew you were an easy
I was
target.
a target, and I mean, it took it happening like 3 or 4 times before. One, I got smarter and didn't put myself in situations where that could happen. Like if I felt like it was gonna. This is how people talk about street smarts. Sometimes you just have it innately, and other times it's experience.
Right.
And in this case was experience. You get robbed enough times, you're like, all right, I'm not going down that street. I'm going to walk across the street. If I see a group of people coming towards me, I'm going to go ahead and cross the street and pretend like I'm going somewhere else. I'm not going to bring money with me. I'm not going to have a wallet. If they want to rob me, they can take my school books. I don't care. But I mean, that happened all the time.
Yeah. I've never been robbed myself, other than the time I gave the guy money for a fake ID and he just left. But I've never been robbed where somebody's taking the stuff on me. So I was talking about the Main Street, right? So I worked at a comic book store on Main Street, 2 different spots on Main Street. It actually moved over the years, but on one of them, there was a shooting that happened outside the comic store where cops had to come in and dig the fucking bullets out of the wall because the evidence was like in the wall.
So there was a nightclub across the street from the comic store. I know this because I used to go there when I was in high school. Was it something that happened at night and then like the next day they had to go grab the evidence, or did it happen while you were working?
No, I wasn't working. It happened at night. Yeah, that nightclub was, I think it was called Palladia, I think.
Yeah, something like that. I used to go there all the time too. Yeah.
That was known for a rowdy crowd, for sure. Not to be confused with Marty and Lenny's, which was a little bit around the block. That was just like people who thought they were in Miami that weren't.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting.
How was your school? So you went to smaller schools, right? Like 'cause your Catholic school, I think your elementary and middle school might have been 30, 40 people a class, right?
Yeah, about 30 people per class.
How much was your high school? Like how many were in your high school class?
Only like 100 per class.
So my school had over 600 in any given year, and the school was a 3-year school at the time. They've now made it a 4-year school, believe it or not.
And by class, I don't mean classroom. I mean like there was 100 freshmen, 100 sophomores, 100 juniors.
Yeah, and so in my school was a public school, New Rochelle High School, and at that time that I was there in the late 80s, we were having a lot of race issues in New Rochelle.
Yeah. And by school, you mean that place that you used to go to every once in a while?
Well, no, I went every morning, and then I immediately left most mornings. But I did start the morning there because they had a system in place, was if you didn't go to homeroom, they called your house. Mm-hmm. Ironically, that was the only class you had to go to for them not to call your house. So I used to go to homeroom, check in, and then find somebody to leave and leave for the day.
So did you have an end game in mind when this was like, were you like, you know what, I'll figure it out later? Like I mean, for me, it took a while. I mean, my school was pretty far away from my house. So, I mean, it was, for me to walk home, there was a private bus that went in the mornings and in the afternoons. That was it. Right. And it was pretty far away. So if I didn't have a car, I was stranded there. So there was nothing to cut. Right. If you cut, you're miles away from, it was, in the middle of a residential neighborhood and like miles away from even like a deli to where you can go hang out. Right. So there was just no reason, but you would go to school and then you would just leave. Right. Which is fine. But at some point in time, it has to cross your mind. Like, what am I doing with the rest of my life?
No, that's the problem. It didn't. The approach was go to homeroom, leave for the day. Sometimes I'd even go to a couple classes and then leave for the day, because the strategy was if I go to a couple classes, because I took a public bus, so I'd walk to the corner of our
which
street,
ran like every 20 minutes.
Yeah, every 20 minutes, take the public bus. The high school, there was a public bus right in front of it. So the only strategy I had was on the days that I went to a couple classes, the hot dog truck showed up right next to the bus stop, so I could get a couple hot dogs before I got on the bus and went home. So yeah, no, I didn't. Look, I never thought I was going to go back to college. I worked in a warehouse late in my high school years, even when I was still supposed to be in high school. I worked in a warehouse. So at the time, like, there was no long-term plan. The plan was, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm making pretty good money. We'll see what happens. And then at some point, after I had dropped out of high school and I was doing that for a couple extra years, that's where I started saying, like, man, I don't want to fucking do this exact same thing for the next 40 years.
Yeah. So question for you. Was there a moment where you were like, I'm dropping out of high school? Like, I'm no longer registering for classes?
My parents would not allow that approach.
So for you, dropping out of high school was, I'm just not going to show up.
Correct.
Got it.
And so even when eventually what happened was, I think it was 11th grade, they called my dad in for what probably was the literally 100th time he'd been into my different schools over the years. And they laid out a plan to him, like, hey, in essence, your kid's a problem kid. We're going to send him to a school that is like a sister school, but it's like really smaller classes, almost like the Breakfast Club type approach where everybody's in one room. They know you're there. They watch you. At the end of the day, you can go. And my dad was like, here's the deal. Like, I'm not coming in anymore. You do whatever you want. Whatever works for you works. I'm not coming in anymore. And so once he had that approach, then I actually started going even less. Like, there were some mornings I wouldn't even go then to worry about the call from home.
Yeah, because you knew that you weren't going to get in trouble.
Yeah. So that, I mean, there was no end plan. I mean, unfortunately, as you get older and you smarten up and you start experiencing things, and look, I was always a pretty street smart kid, but the other side of life started catching up with you. Like, what am I going to do? Do I want to buy a house? Do I want to have a family? All those kind of things that go along with it. So, do I want a career versus a job? And look, the other thing is too, like, look, I could have made pretty good money in what I was doing, but not the kind of money I'm making now.
Yeah.
And it would have just been a job. and who knows what would have happened like during the pandemic, like because we used to do conventions all around the U.S., so that shit would have been shut down. So probably I don't know. I mean, look, I started out of school. We had just brought this up the other day to a few people. I started out of school 25 years ago making $40,000. And I was actually making more in the warehouse. I had to take a pay cut to go to the firm. And I'm like, yeah, this whole go to school and make a good job, like this doesn't make sense here. But and I was able to live on $40,000. I had a fucking apartment. I had a car. I had a roommate. But I couldn't live on $40,000 now. And I know it's because as you go, things change and, you have kids and family and a bigger house, not an apartment, all that stuff. But it's crazy, like just to look back and be like, oh yeah, I thought I lived perfectly fine on $40,000.
Yeah, no shit. So, do you remember the thing about Main Street, New Rochelle, was that there were a whole bunch of different types of shops for 10 blocks of just like stores. And if you go there now, last time I drove through New Rochelle, they're all shut down. Like Main Street, at least the last time I saw it, looked like something out of a zombie movie. I mean, it was mostly like broken windows and stuff boarded up and like nothing was going on. I don't know what it looks like now.
There's still some of that. And the stores that have seemed to prosper, which I cannot understand, there's about 3 in a 9-block radius, cowboy boots.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
In New York.
Not only New York, in New Rochelle. Cowboy boots. There is literally 3 different stores from where the movie theaters used to be. Throw a rock almost any way you hit one of those cowboy boot stores.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I remember what's the correct term? The Asian stores that sold either jewelry or like curio items. But if you knew what else they sold, you can walk to the back and you can ask them for things like fireworks. I think one of them sold weed.
Yep.
Like there were all sorts of every Asian store had a back room that sold something that wasn't supposed to be sold or wasn't legal. Like it's funny because you were here for 4th of July. You can buy fireworks in just about any supermarket in Arizona, but they're the fireworks that they're like sparklers, and it doesn't shoot higher than 10 feet off the ground. They're very underwhelming compared to the stuff that we grew up with. We can buy M80s and Blockbusters, which was like a quarter stick of dynamite and a brick of firecrackers and jumping jacks and chasers and bottle rockets. All those things we could buy just by going to one of the Asian stores and then going to the back and then showing the guy some money, and then he would open up a treasure chest of stuff and we can buy them there.
Yeah, and the funny thing about those stores was, like you said, if you knew people, but even when you first walked into them, there was no hey, you got any stuff in the back? Maybe, it was just like, hey, I'm here to buy fireworks. And yeah, sure, go in the back. There was no hiding the fact. Yeah. And then there was also a vicious circle, because I'm sure you remember this. You buy the stuff in the Asian store in the back. You go, you shoot some off. You get caught by the cops. The cops would take them. They never really press charges or anything. They would just take them. But then I had a friend who knew a cop, and we would actually buy some back from the cop. So it was like a vicious cycle. Yeah. He wasn't turning them in. They were reselling them on the street.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact that, we were in grade school, not even high school. We were 7th and 8th grade, or at least I was. You were a little bit older. They were selling us Blockbusters, M80s. We were buying some heavy duty fireworks from them, and it's amazing we didn't lose a hand or a limb from just doing all that stuff. But it's kind of just what people did.
Yeah. So funny story about the Asian stores that are in New Rochelle. When my wife first came here from Australia, who, as you know, my wife is Asian, my dad was telling a story about the Asian grocery store that he goes to. Mm. And so I turned to my wife, because when you say an Asian grocery store, it has an implication of, they sell a lot of the unique Asian food, maybe the noodles. You could
today,
right?
Yeah.
Today.
That's it. It's a very specific thing. They sell, Asian foods,
right?
Whereas Asian stores in New Rochelle were everything, supermarkets.
Yeah.
It's an Asian store.
Yes, and there was one that's a particular one that was very close to North Avenue, which was a fruit stand. And my dad would always call it the Asian fruit store. And I'd say to my wife, there's just an Asian lady who runs it. It's a regular fucking fruit store. Like, I don't know why he calls it the Asian fruit store.
Yeah, that's what we called it.
Yeah.
Anytime we had to go get something, it was go to the Asian store. Well, it was actually go to the Chinese store, but I don't think that's politically correct. So,
yeah. The Oriental store is what you say, right? No?
No, we don't say that.
Okay,
I don't think we say that.
Sorry to all the Oriental rugs out there.
You just offended every Oriental rug on the planet.
So one thing I was starting to say about New Rochelle High School was the race riots that happened in the late 80s, where it had gotten to a point where it was so much tension between blacks and whites. The Hispanic crowd, I don't remember them siding with either side, to be honest, but the tension had gotten so bad that there was a point where a white guy was chasing a black guy down the hallway with a knife, yelling very derogatory words at him. And
this is at New Rochelle High School?
New Rochelle High School. Mm-hmm. The teacher went to the door to see what was happening. We could hear the words. We heard the guy run by. We heard the other guy run by. He literally just closed the door and was like, I'm not getting involved. Yeah. So this is one of those things. Like,
do you remember, I don't remember the year, but it was the Rodney King incident where they caught it on camera, like 6 or 7 police cops in LA beating the crap out of this guy. When they got off, when they announced the verdict and those police officers didn't get charged with anything, riots happened all over the country. But particularly in New Rochelle, I remember going to school the next morning and the bus drove down, I think it was North Avenue, and for a couple of miles, and it looked like Northern Ireland. I mean, like cars had been lit on fire. You can see smoldered remains of anything. All the stores had been looted. All of the windows had been smashed in. Like, it was super crazy shit.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that that's still happening today, right? When some of these verdicts are coming back with, Black Lives Matter things that have been happening, where the verdicts are coming back that I don't know how any sane person doesn't see what happened. Usually there's a lot of them that have video, no less, not just people's words, they have videos. And so a lot of that stuff is still happening. But do you remember the guy, Dennis, who lived the street on the other side of you? I think that's Lafayette.
Yeah.
Where he was the neighborhood drug dealer. And so he used to sell drugs all the time on the street.
I never purchased drugs in those days, but I knew you can see the drug deals happening. Mm-hmm. I mean, I lived next to a halfway house, right? So a little bit about that, and then we can make full circle back to Dennis. But the halfway house was literally 20 feet from my door, 30 feet from my door. And the people that lived in there were recovering drug addicts that they put there, and it was like a government-funded program, and they hardly paid anything for rent. But most of them were absolutely bonkers and crazy and out of their mind and had clearly not kicked the habit. So we would be outside in my parking lot playing basketball, and then there were drug deals like 10, 15 feet away. They were, especially when crack became popular, they were out there smoking it. Like, it was just, no big deal. Like, nobody cares. I'm not trying to hide it.
Yeah. And you tell the story about the time you went on a site visit with your dad in New Rochelle, where you went in the basement on Lincoln Avenue and you were literally like kicking crack files as you were going.
It was the corner of Lincoln and North, and it was I don't know if it was a halfway house or not, but I remember looking down in the grass and picking up a little crack file and going to my dad like, look what I found. He's like, put that down. You don't touch that. You can get AIDS.
So parents. So Dennis was used to sell drugs. I never bought drugs either. I had a lot of cousins who did, so I've been around it quite a few times.
Did Dennis have a brother?
No, not that I know of.
Oh, okay.
So he used to sell stuff all the time, and he gotten busted a couple times too. And so like he would go away for a while, so like you wouldn't see him for 6 months, and then he'd be back. And he'd be like, "Hey, Dennis, where you been?" He'd be like, the family went up north for a little." Like, he never actually talked about it.
Sure.
So
how was juvie?
Yeah, it's just it. look, I get that people are going to do whatever they need to do to make money. I get it. Right. But it was so crazy how the like you see in movies a lot where it's like very secretive kind of deals. Like if somebody's on a corner and they give a signal and they go to somebody else and that's where they get the stuff. And, it's like in movies, it's always multiple layers of these deals so people can avoid the being watched and the chain of command and all that stuff. In New Rochelle, it was just like the guys would just walk down the street and be like,
so out in the open.
It was, you won't weed? You won't weed? Like they just didn't care.
And it wasn't even that, like, like I said, my dad's van getting broken into in broad daylight on one of the busiest streets in the Bronx, and people just looked the other way. I was waiting. I worked at a bank in Mount Vernon, which wasn't too far from the Bronx and wasn't too far from New Rochelle. And one day after I was done with my shift, I'm outside at the bus stop waiting, and these three guys just walked across, and there's like 10 people with me all waiting for the bus. And these three guys just across the street walked up to a car, and one of them took a bat and smashed the window in. And we, like, of course it startled us. So we all looked over, and the guy reached in and pulled out like a purse and a bunch of other stuff. And then they just walked away, like not ran away, not like tried to do it secretly, like just ballsy, broad daylight. And I remember looking around at me to see if anybody was going to do anything, and people just kind of looked away and just was like, just minding my own business, not getting involved. It was just like so matter of fact. No, but it struck me that they could do that, because in my mind, I'm like, screw those bastards, let's go get them, But you look around and people are just like, nope, I don't want to get involved. It's not worth it. It's not my car. I don't care.
So one other thing that was a little bit unique to New Rochelle, I actually just mentioned this recently to my wife. I don't know how I thought about it, but I mentioned it to her. And she's like, are you fucking crazy? My dad used to buy fish out of a car's trunk. So, but it
was fresh.
Yeah, in Glen Island, there was the boat that used to go out every day. I can't remember the name of it. But it used to go out every day, and people would come home, and what they'd catch, they would load up the back of their car, and they had some ice in there and stuff, but they would drive around the corner so they're not in the same area. They'd open up their trunk, and you could buy fish out of it. And so my parents used to do that like every week. We used to go down there, and they used to buy it. And the funny thing is, when I was telling my wife this story, like now that she's pointed it out to me, I know how crazy it fucking sounds. But I was telling it to her like, yeah, no, this is just what you did. This is where you got fresh fish. Like you went, got it from the guy who just caught it that day, and you buy it out of the back of his car. So did you guys ever do anything like that? Because there was a lot of those cars near Glen Island.
Yeah, except we didn't buy fish. So my dad, I don't know if he just was working in an area where this happened often, but there would be days where he would come home with like speakers, like, like at the time, like Infinity or whatever the hot brand of like electronics was at the time. And I'd be like, Dad, those are like really expensive speakers. Where did you get them? And he's like, I bought it off the back of a truck. Some guy was selling them. They were $20 a piece. I'm like, Dad, those are like $400 each, like speakers. Like, you didn't pay $20 for those. He's like, oh yeah, I paid $20 for them. I mean, the out of the back of a trunk or out of the back of a truck deals that happened in New York were like legendary. Like today it would be iPhones and iPads and like super expensive electronics. I think that would be the equivalent of what you would find today if you found somebody that just happened to have a truck and open the back door and be like, hey bud, you want any of this stuff? Like that's what you would see.
Yeah. I used to date a girl who she was connected with some guys who used to, in essence, rob Banana Republic trucks is the only thing I can think of. It wasn't shit was falling out the back. They used to basically rob the trucks, and then she would buy a bunch of merchandise from them, and it was just whatever. Mm-hmm. She would buy, $10 a pair, $20 a pair, things like that, because it still had all the tags and shit on it. Then she would go to the store and return it and be like, oh, I bought this for some family members. It's all the wrong sizes. And, this was 25 years ago. So, software wasn't as, the logic wasn't there to be like, wait a minute, you just returned, $400 worth of shit at this store as well. And so that she did that all the time. And she would get like these massive gift cards to Banana Republic and then get actually shit that she wanted. So, yeah, that was pretty crazy. And Banana Republic wasn't really my size. It was my style, but not my size. So I never really got anything out of it.
I mean, that's back when Banana Republic actually sold like safari clothing, or was that like after they made the switch to like Old Navy style?
It was a little bit after the switch because they started carrying like business-ish clothes.
Oh, yeah. I used to love Banana Republic because you could go get like khakis and like safari hats, and like that whole style was awesome. I remember the safari stores in like the Stanford Mall had like a Jeep busting out of the front of the store. It was like super overdone and really cool as like a teenager. But then they went like they got bought by like Gap or Old Navy, and then all of a sudden it just became normal clothes like that you can buy at like Macy's.
You know, the other thing that's funny is that's a name that I'm surprised they're allowed to keep, right? Because Banana Republic is a derogatory
what it stands for,
name for some third world countries. So it's interesting. I didn't even think about that till we just started talking about that. Hashtag me too, right? No, wrong one. All right. So one other one that I used to do on the way to school every morning, and I think newspapers are pretty much a dead industry now, and I think I started the trend. We used to walk to school each morning, and we walked by a newspaper machine on the street, which if anybody listening to this has seen one of those, it's like...
the one where you put the quarter in and you open it up and you can take 30 newspapers if you want to.
And that's exactly what we used to do. So we'd put a quarter in, we'd take all the newspapers out, we'd keep half of them to try to sell like door to door, and the other half, just to fuck the people even more, we just put them on top of the
so people can walk by and take them.
So anybody who walk by could just take them. So,
I don't know who thought the honor system would work for vending machines. That's like the dumbest idea ever. Although I will tell you this, at the company that I work for, at their headquarters in Chicago, they have a snack bar that it's maxed out, and any snack you can possibly imagine that you would find in a convenience store exists in the building in this snack bar, and it's the honor system. So you walk in, and I'm sure there's cameras everywhere, but you can't really see them. You walk in, you take what you want, you walk it up to a kiosk, you scan it. There's nobody in there. You scan it, and then you scan your credit card, and then you walk away. Like, that's it.
So speaking of the honor system, when we walked through the Arizona airport last week, everything was closed. By the time we landed, it was like 9:30, whatever it was. Everything was closed. Except there was one honor system kiosk open. It's funny that you mentioned that. And I actually said to my wife, that shit would be fucking bare if that was in New York. If they tried that shit in New York, that'd be absolutely bare.
Yep. All right. What about good things? Name one good thing that you remember about New Rochelle? We can't make the whole episode about bashing New Rochelle.
There's highways that get out of it.
Come on. There's got to be something from your childhood that you
well, look, here's
good memories.
To me, the biggest thing that I got out of New Rochelle, and I say this all the time, and especially now it's even more important because now with all the race issues and all those things, when you are pretty poor, there is no black guy, there is no Hispanic guy, there is no Italian guy. Yeah. You're all poor. That trumps everything, right? So growing up, our friends are a multitude of nationalities, colors, all those different things because of that. So that's one thing I really do appreciate is having grown up that way, you got to experience a lot of different things from that aspect. So that's one thing I actually did like about New Rochelle. Yeah.
To piggyback on that, the experiences that we had there made us who we are. I mean, street smarts we got because we had to survive. And it's not like, there weren't bullets buzzing by our head. Do you remember the Chevy Novas?
My parents had one.
I know, but do you remember the Blue Novas, the gang that used to drive by when we were outside and throw M80s and Blockbusters out the window of the car?
You've talked about those. Scatter? I do not remember those at all.
You don't remember that? Oh my God. Anytime we saw a Blue Nova, we would like run for the bushes. I can't believe you don't remember that.
No, maybe I was too scared, and it's.
I was just about to say, like, we didn't have there weren't like bullets whizzing by our heads or anything, and then I'm like, no, just quarter stick of dynamite.
Yeah, but as you talk about like street smart, sometimes we learned it the hard way. Like when you and I've talked about this before, when the Beastie Boys were popular, you and I were going around ripping off the Volkswagen logos, and where the guy came up to us and. we
Try to
knew
get us
enough
to go up to his room,
not to go up to his apartment, but I don't think we really understood why. Where he was like, "Hey guys, why don't you come up to my apartment? We can hang out for a little." And we were just like, "No, I don't think that's a good idea."
Yeah.
So
many close calls. Anyways, what I was trying to say on the good side of things is, we learned a lot. But more importantly, I learned what I didn't want my kids to experience. Like all those experiences that I took, I remember going, you know what? I'm going to get a good job. I'm going to get out of this frickin' town, never come back. And I'm going to provide my kids a lifestyle so that they don't ever have to know, other than in stories and listening to this podcast, what it was like growing up in that type of environment. I know my mom's going to listen to this and your parents probably would too. And say like, oh, it wasn't that bad. And, you had it way better than we did when we were growing up. And that's fine. It is what it is. But, it was that bad by today's standards. And, like I said, when I took from it is I didn't want to raise children in that type of environment. So, that was my motivation for going to college, getting a degree, getting a good job, and moving out.
And and some of the things, like when you're in it at the time, like I don't think I had a bad childhood. I don't think it was a bad environment.
That was what we did.
Yeah,
like we didn't know any better.
But like when you tell stories to people, as you're meeting people now, you expand your circle. You meet people from other places, other areas who've had different upbringings. Like I remember telling the story about how we used to get government cheese, government sauce.
That government cheese was fucking good.
Government milk. And so the milk, I was telling this specific story, was the milk used to be a powder and you used to put it in water. So it was always like really, really watered down milk is what it tasted
Which was a bad assumption on their part because they assumed that you actually had running water.
Yeah.
Which wasn't always the case.
So
if you forgot to pay the bill.
Yeah. So like I was telling somebody that story and they were like, "Oh my God, I can't." She's like, "I thought I was poor until I hear stories like this." Yeah. The other thing, Big Daddy to this day will not have yellow American cheese because that's the cheese they used to give the big blocks of when they gave you the government cheese.
I don't remember American cheese. I remember cheddar.
Well, yeah, it was cheddar. Sorry, it was cheddar, but it was the big block and it has that look.
I remember my dad and I sitting there with a cheese slicer, just peeling it one slice at a time and eating it right off the block.
Yeah. So the good things we got out of Rochelle was that we left and we learned. So I'd be interested in anybody listening out there who has the time, wants to take the time, comment below on where they grew up, what they thought of it, maybe any nostalgia view of it. Like, once you get away from things, look, I truly do appreciate my childhood. I understand that we were pretty poor, but at the time I never felt it. The only time I felt it was when we tried to get certain clothes, right? Like I remember being like, "Oh, can we get these Nikes?" And they're like, "No, you can get these Skippies." And for people who don't know what like Skippies are, and I was just explaining this recently.
Didn't we talk about it on the podcast?
I don't think so, but
no? All right.
I think we might have talked about it in person with my wife last week.
Yeah. Skippies.
Where like if Nike has one swoosh on it, Skippies would have like two swooshes on it. Right? That would be the Skippies version of a popular brand. So, yeah. And then one other thing that you got from Rochelle was me.
Oh, that was a good thing, right?
Yes. And I'm Michael Carter.
And I'm David Michael.
And we are Ridiculously Bored.